they're doing it with a real ratzon, a real desire, and it was Zrizut. Now what happens is now that we've kind of covered, or kind of discussed the idea of Zrizut and Aaron HaKohen. Now we're going to learn about two or three cases in the Tanakh, and we're going to see that sometimes Zrizut is a good thing, and sometimes Zrizut is not necessarily a good thing. Sometimes we have to view Zrizut as a passion and a desire and a willingness to take our time. Right? You would think that Zrizut means the opposite of taking your time, but in some cases it actually means to take our time, to really think things through. And sometimes you might even say that Zrizut doesn't necessarily mean to do it quickly, but it means actually to do something consistently and to do it with a lot of passion throughout the time. So here we go, and now the next part of the same drush. It says, so he says, now we're going to go through the various sources, a few sources, and comparing and contrasting a few stories or episodes from Tanakh. And he says, the first situation is when Shmuel appoints Shaul HaMelech. As first act as king, Shmuel appoints Shaul, the first king of Am Yisrael, and Shaul is told by Shmuel to do what? He's told him to go back to Gilgal, and he tells him, wait 7 days. Shmuel tells Shaul, go wait 7 days. And in a part, and then after those 7 days, then you'll come back. I'll call for you, that is, Shmuel will call for Shaul, and then you'll start bringing the public offerings, the public korbanot, and that will kind of be the official sign that you are the king. And instead, what happens is Shaul, however, does not wait. He doesn't take his time. He doesn't take his kind of his. He doesn't. He can't. He's so excited to be king that he stops in the middle, and he brings after. He doesn't wait the full 7 days, but he couldn't wait because he was so excited, and therefore he gets punished. And what's his punishment? Punishment is that he doesn't become his family. The dynasty stops after Shaul, and now he goes. He says, now we can understand this whole idea of Zrizut, that sometimes Zrizut doesn't mean speed, but rather means thoughtfulness, careful, being deliberate, understanding what's the context, etc. He says, when we look there, it says, you should wait. Shmuel tells Shaul, wait 7 days. And he says, then I will come and pick you up. Right? That's what Shmuel tells Shaul. He says, I'll wait 7 days, and then I'll come and call you. And it says, how could it be that Shmuel could test Shaul and say to him, take your time, wait. This guy was the first king of Am Yisrael. He's telling him, he says, the first thing you have to do, wait. Right? That's a great question. Again, kind of very stylistic of the Zera Shimshon is that he asks these questions that we didn't think about before. And then he says,
You think it did like an Israeli, like regular.
Yeah, right. He says exactly, oh, you want the job? No problem, now wait 7 days. Right? So usually when you have a job, the first thing you want to do is you want to make an impact. So you just rush. And he's saying, no, now you need to wait. Take your step back.
In a way, that's true Zrizut.
Yeah.
Because it's control.
Right, so he's going to compare this to another story of David and Melech, and we'll see how they're very similar in terms of their personalities, but very important. The difference is a very important difference. So he says here, in fact, for not procrastinating. Right, in other words, he was punished for not taking his time. What happened? Instead of waiting the full 7 days, Shaul goes in and takes a few days, and then he says, I can't take it anymore, brings the car, jumps up to Shmuel, and he says, okay, you're going to get punished. So how could it be that he got punished for it? Not only did Shmuel test him, but in fact he gets punished. Right? We have a pasuk in Mishlei, and it says, have you seen a person who works with Zrizut? Right? Chazita, meaning you saw ish mahir, a person who works quickly. A person, right? What happens? What happens when how does a person be successful? He gets a lot of things done. Right? And then the pasuk reads, have you ever seen a person who stands, who's fast? He's the person who gets the job done quickly, he's the one who sits in front of the king. So how could it be? Right? We see from this pasuk in Mishlei that a king should be quick, and he should work things out quickly. If so, what did we just understand? That disproves what Shmuel was challenging Shaul about. Shaul, the first king, should have worked quickly. He wants to work quickly. So of course we should reward him, not punish him. והסברה נמית נותנת בכך שמי שיש לו לפקח על עסקי רבים צריך להזדרז ולפקח עליהם. He says also, without even the psukim, logic would state a person who's like the level of a king, who has such a role of leadership, he needs to get a lot of things done. That's how you're going to test him. You're going to test him if he gets things done, right? You're not going to test him based on if he's just a good-looking person. You want him to get things done. That's every leader, right? The people want to see the leader that they're getting things done. And if you're not working so that's also logical. So he says, how could it be that Shmuel was testing Shaul with the one trait which is the opposite of what we would understand as being the king, the quality, the characteristic, the trait should have that a king should have. So that's putting that question. Let's hold off on that question for a second and answering that question. And now the Zera Shimshon brings another case of another king, which is another king. The next king is David HaMelech. And in this case, we talk about a case in which it says there are two incidents in which David HaMelech fought the Plishtim. Right, and in both cases, in which the Plishtim, it's actually in which the Plishtim tried to attack David HaMelech and Am Yisrael. And in each case, David asks Hashem for insight as to what to do. And in one case, Hashem gives him one answer, and in one case, Hashem gives him the opposite answer. And that's exactly where the Zera Shimshon picks up. And he says, in the second, the Zera Shimshon works backwards, and he says the second situation, in the second incident of the Plishtim, it says here, "V'yoter kasher shematzinu shakadosh baruch hu ba'atzmo nisal David baruch b'derech hazeh." Now, even more so, besides Shmuel testing Shaul, here we have Hashem, the Kadosh Baruch Hu, testing David HaMelech. And he says here, in the second case, it says, "Dichtiv lo ta'aleh hasev alecharehem v'hi cheshamacha et kol hatza'ada b'roshei abechaim as techaratz." Hashem says, don't go directly, don't attack the Plishtim straight on, but rather you go around the bushes, and when you hear the bushes, kind of rattling, and you hear the tree, the sound of the stomping, then that's when you know you go. And what are we trying to learn from here? He says here, it's a sign that Hashem is basically telling him that take your time, meaning I don't want you to go straight at the attack. I don't want you to just go straight on an attack in this case, and this is the second case of the Plishtim. In this case, I want you to do is go take your time. And he says, wait for the sign. So in this case, Lama Matchila Ratzashi Tatzel. Why did Hashem want David to kind of stall the attack? Right? And only after waiting, then Hashem says, okay, you've waited. Once I tell you to wait and you've got the sign, then you can go out and attack. That doesn't, you would think that in a case of a ode, and you say in this case, or a case of a war, you would think that the faster the attack, you get it done, move on. Right? We also have to understand a little bit, we have to look at the difference between what Shaul and David in terms of their Shaul was tested with the whole idea of procrastinating, the idea of Zrizut, or the opposite of Zrizut, at the beginning of when he was just became king, literally the first thing. David was not tested until he was already waged in one battle already, meaning because there were two battles with the Plishtim. The first time Hashem tells it, David HaMelech asks Hashem, Hashem says, yes, go ahead and do it. And the second time Hashem says, no, wait, go around the bush, wait for the sign, and then you can go. And tells him basically the opposite is true. He tells him to wait. So here you see is that David was tested in the second time, meaning that David was tested in, it wasn't his first thing as a king. And in the case of Shaul, it was literally the first thing that he did as the king. So he says, ששאול הקדוש ברוך הוא עלה על פלישתים ודוד לא נסע עד שעשה מלחמה אחת וניצחה ששאול הקדוש ברוך הוא עלה על פלישתים התיתן בידי. He says, the first time he says, David asks Hashem, should I go up against the Plishtim? Will you give them to me in my hand? Will you deliver them to me in my hand? ויאמר Hashem על דוד, עלה כי נתון נתן את הפלישתים. Yes, of course I will go up. ויבוא דוד בבל הפרצים ויקם שם דוד. In the first case, in that case, which is the first story of the Plishtim, David HaMelech asks Hashem, he says, should I go? Will you give the Plishtim into my hand? And he says, yes, you should do it. Go ahead and do it. Right? As opposed to the second case, which is when Hashem tells him to wait a little bit. Vasof, Shosifo, Plishtim la'alot, even when in the second case, when the Plishtim continue to kind of attack, then it says Hasev acharehem. Then he says, don't go directly up and attack them, which is what he told him in the first case. But rather, he says, wait patiently, wait for the sign, and then go. So what do we have here is that we have that in two cases. We have in both cases, David and Shaul were told to take their time, right? In other words, case number one is Shmuel tells Shaul, wait a week. And in case number two, David is told by Hashem, he tells him in the second war against the Plishtim, he's told, wait, go around. Yes, I will give them to you, but you have to do it. You have to do it slowly, right? So he says here. So what do we learn here? That basically we have this midah of patience, right? And it's not necessarily speed, right? As a king, you would think that you want the thing to be working quickly. In the case, it's not necessarily true. V'yesh lomar, we can now explain. Shamru zichronam livracha b'masechet Yoma. We learned that in Masechet Yoma daf kaf bet amud bet. It says ben shana Shaul b'malcho. That Shaul was a year old when he reigned. It doesn't necessarily mean literally he was 1 year old, but rather in terms of his sin, the amount of purity that he was kiven shana shelo ta'am chet. He was very pure and he had not tasted sin yet. Uvesofa sota amrina, and at the end of sota it says Zrizut mivia lidei nikiyut. Zrizut leads to cleanliness, right? I mean that the more you are working with the passion and desire, the more focused you are, and therefore you're less prone to doing things that are not so clean. And it says ufarsu shama mifarshim. If you look in the mifarshim in the end of Masechet Sotah, it says here, the nikiyut v'tzalomar naki mikol chet, meaning that cleanliness refers to free of sin. Shaul shayalo nikiyut, because Shaul was such a clean person based on the proof that we just brought from Yoma, from the Sechet Yoma, v'adai shayalo zrizut hakodem elav b'agdara, hakodem elav b'agdara. Of course, Shaul, with his purity in action, he had the zrizut. He had the zrizut that comes with being preceding a cleanliness, right? Which is the level preceding cleanliness. Lachen did not need, Shaul didn't need to be encouraged to act with speed. Adraba, Ratzah Shmuel odialo shetzarich zrizut yeh meshukal k'fi hamakom k'fi hashah k'fi hazman. In fact, what was Shmuel trying to teach him is saying sometimes zrizut means you have to understand the situation. You have to take things a little bit slowly, right? Because Shaul was so pure and he just did things, quietly. His zrizut was so pure that he didn't realize that sometimes zrizut doesn't necessarily mean speed. It also means focus, being deliberate things intentional about things. So zrizut eno le'olam tov. Sometimes working with speed, working quickly, it's not the quickness that sometimes is the virtuous act, but rather sometimes it's the will to do what is right that causes that causes someone to act quickly. But that quick means that sometimes you have to understand and be able to balance and be able to consider all the different options. And when you consider all the different options and you've done things carefully, so that carefully takes time. When you're careful and you take your time and then you act quickly, that careful act is also a sign of zrizut. It's not a sign. In fact, it's not a sign of atzelut, of laziness, but rather it's a sign of zrizut, that you're thinking things through, and you understand, and you're weighing the various appropriate actions. So now Korach kativ al tatzei l'rav maher. Indeed, if we look at that same, if we look at this pasuk, it says, "Do not enter quickly into lariv maher." Excuse me, al tatzei lariv maher. Don't go quickly into a fight. Right? When we look at fights, in fact, in general, when we look at quarrels, altercations, we look at them. Most of the time, what happens is when someone gets heated, what happens? You say something quickly, you don't mean it, or you say something out of knee-jerk reaction or something like that. And he says that the quote of Mishlei says, "Al tetzei lariv meher." Don't be quick to enter into a fight or quarrel. And then it says later on in Kohelet it says, "Eit milchama ve'eit shalom." There's a time for peace, a time for war, right? Meaning, what are the psukim here that the Zera Shimshon is trying to teach us? He's trying to tell us that we have to understand what's appropriate at this time versus appropriate at the next time. We don't have to be Zrizut. Doesn't mean, don't be quick to cause a fight. Think things through. When we think things through, we really understand and we can really kind of put things into the right place in the right context and know what the appropriate response is. And here it says, Mishum Hachi, Nisau Ba'atzlut. This is why Shmuel tested Shaul with a quote unquote a sense of patience, right? And not procrastination, atzlut. I don't think, wouldn't try to translate atzlut as procrastination here, but actually I would translate it as patience. Right, because atzlut, right? Atzlut sometimes atzlut sounds like laziness. I don't think it's laziness here. It's right. Only in this case, I wouldn't necessarily always, but in the case at sale, sometimes means that you're doing it. You're doing it focused and you're taking it carefully. So it's not procrastinating, but I understand the situation. I understand that if I act quickly now, my response will not be as good as if I took a little bit more time. My response will be even better, and it will come out better, and therefore it's not a sense of the Zrizut is actually a sign of patience. And so it's certainly atzlut. So it says here, Mishum hachi nisau b'atzlut lirot im yesh sham im shehu shaya kol kach zariz, a person who's so good at, like Shaul HaMelech, who is so good at being swift, quick, doing things quickly. It also knows that Shmuel was testing Shaul to say, can this person who's so good at working things with a pure Zrizut, which precedes cleanliness, which was what we proved from the various Gemaras in Masechet Yoma and Masechet Sotah, can this person who is so good at Zrizut, can he also know that Zrizut sometimes means patience? Right? It means that also sometimes you have to work, and you have to work quickly to say, give me some time. Right? What's the best? How do we know when's the best? When you get angry or when you're about to do something, you say, you know what? Let me sleep on it. When you say let me sleep on it, and then you have more time to focus and think about things through, your response is usually much more thought through and level-headed. Instead of doing something out of like passion, meaning heat, out of heat of the moment, you say something or you say you're going to do something, and then you miss the follow through.
No, they say that Reuben lost the whole Bechura because of his impulsiveness.
Right, exactly. What is it?
Such a big loss. Where did it go? It's Aaron Cohen.
Right. So what did
in terms of the Kahuna.
Right. So in fact, the brachas of Yaakov Avinu, what does he say? Ruvain bechori ata, pachaz kamayim. You were fast. You were swift. Yeah. Right. You were swift. Your swift action. Sometimes swift actions too much. Right. Exactly. So that's exactly what Shaul was being tested for here.
Wow.
Now that we've understood the story of Shmuel and Shaul, now he's going to go back to the story of David, and he says the same thing with Hashem and David. David had shown that he didn't possess as much Zrizut as Shaul HaMelech. So he says, he was not free of all sin. Right? Shaul, we just proved that was very pure of sin, and therefore his Zrizut was just like unadulterated, really interested, really focused, and really like before cleanliness, before the kiyut, his was Zrizut. Here, and David, he wasn't as good about it, right? And therefore, he wanted to see. Therefore, Hashem wanted to see his Zrizut. He wanted to see what would happen. How would he react? How would David respond in the first war? Once he saw that David possessed the ability to ask permission, and once he said yes, go do it, and he did it right away, that shows a sense of Zrizut. He showed yes, it's a little bit of he took his time to ask, but then he said yes, go ahead, so he right away. And therefore, Az Hodio Banisayon, Shahusha Zrizut Le'olam Eino Tov. He there impressed upon him that sometimes through that test that Zrizut is not always good. Right? Sometimes you have to be focused, deliberate, intentional. Right? So that's the same thing. In the second test, what happens? Hashem says to him, you want to win this war? Don't go straight on the attack in the second time, but rather he says, go around, wait, patience, and then that was trying to teach David HaMelech that patience is the ability to take your time and then strike. Right? When you strike at the right moment and you wait calmly, then you'll be more successful than if that you just quickly just strike things down right away when it would have happened. And therefore, what happens? Unlike Shaul, David passed the test. Right? Because what happened? In the first time, David was told, David asked Hashem, and Hashem said, go ahead, right away. And the second time, He said, wait patiently and do it. And instead of ignoring what Hashem said, David said, okay, I trust you, Hashem, and he followed the command. And therefore he waited, and once he waited in that time period, and during that time period, he showed that he trusts Hashem, and therefore he didn't fail the test. And now, we can go back to the pasuk. If we look at the pasukim that says, have you ever seen a man who works with speed, right? He stands before a king. He will not stand, the rest of the pasuk says, you will not stand in front of men of darkness. So he says, right? A person who stands in front of kings, of course he's not standing in front of people who are darkness, right? Right? It seems unnecessary. The part of the darkness, that part of the pasuk of the people standing in front of darkness, is not really it's unnecessary in relation to the rest of the pasuk which preceded it, right? So he says, it would have been enough. Just reading that pasuk, had the pasuk just read Chazita ish mahir b'lachto lifnei melachim yatzav, had we read the pasuk just that without the second part, which is the seeing people in the dark, right? The pasuk would have still made sense. So he says here, Ela lefisha af misha zariz tzarich lishkol zrizuto. Rather, we learn that a person, that even one who acts swiftly, must weigh his zrizut, meaning we have to learn how to use this zrizut in the right time, at the right place, at the right moment. We have to understand what the circumstance. And zrizut doesn't necessarily mean right away response, but rather it means each time it has to be focused and say, when is my moment of zrizut? Zrizut doesn't mean I'm fired up, I'm going to do it right away, right? It means that you do it at the right time, you focus, understand the circumstance, and say, when is my optimal opportunity to act swiftly? When is that opportunity? It's not that I have to do it right away, but rather I have to think about the situation and weigh all the considerations. And once I've weighed all the factors, and me acting swiftly in that one moment, right? What do they say about people who are the best people in a room in a meeting? Right? The people who say very little, and they make one comment, but that comment is so perfectly placed that right. So they just listen, right? That's a sign of zrizut. They understand when that moment is. The person who listens.
A lot of my friends in business who are very successful speak very little. But when they speak, it's what.
Right, exactly. So that's the same thing here. He's saying is that a person who takes their zrizut and understands that there's a moment, and that moment is, I take it, I'm listening, I'm focused, I'm intentional. So that one moment when they act, you're just like, wow, okay, they've impressed you because they haven't said much, but when they say something, it's meaningful. And the same thing, that's the sign of zrizut. It's not atzlut. It's not meaning. They're not lazy. The opposite. They're successful business people, but they're taking their time. They're focused on. They're using this zrizut in a channeled way. And he says here, and there now we can understand. And look, it says here, Bishum hachi. Therefore, it teaches us a person who is fast with his work, right? Only the thing that he needs to do. He's only fast with that one thing. He takes his time. He focuses on that one. In the case of the person in a business meeting, that one moment, he knows that he's really good at it. So that one moment, he's going to wait for that moment. And that thing that he does it quickly, right? In his work, that's the work that needs zrizut. That's the one that needs speed and passion and desire. But he's not always quick in all the work that he does as a rule. That's the person who's knows his work, knows his role, and he plays his role perfectly. That's the person who's befitting to stand in front of a king. He will not stand before the men of darkness, because what? For even if sometimes he does things slowly, or he takes his time, right? He's not going to stand in front of darkness. Why? He's taking his time. It's not that a sign of atzlut. It's not a sign of laziness. He's not procrastinating in the negative sense of procrastination, but rather he's deliberating. He's focused. He's intentional about his actions. So he's not showing it as saying you're not going to stand. He will not stand before men of darkness. He's not being considered as a lazy person or as a procrastinator, because he's using his zrizut in a focused way. So that's the point here, is what the pasuk, the reason why the Zera Shimshon says the whole pasuk makes sense. The person who uses his actions, and when he does his actions quickly, he gets in, he does what he needs to do, and he steps out, right? So he's focused on his actions, and then when it's not his turn, he doesn't start to chime in, he doesn't try to step in, rather he just waits. He takes his time, and therefore he's not going to be considered among the people who see darkness, because he'll never considered as someone who's being lazy. In fact, the opposite. His time, his ability to deliberate and to be intentional is not, even though you would think that it's considered the opposite of Zrizut, that is Zrizut. His Zrizut is, I know my time, I know my moment, I know the place, I have to understand the circumstance, and since we have to understand the circumstance and understand all the information, so I'm not being lazy, I'm being deliberate, which in this case is not, and that deliberate can also mean zariz in this regard. So what do we learn so far? So we've learned so far that sometimes a person who holds off on the performance of a mitzvah is appropriate. It's still the midah of zrizut is still there, right? His procrastination is not due to the fact that he doesn't want to do it. It's not that he doesn't want to do the mitzvah. He wants to do the mitzvah in the fullest way, and therefore when he does the mitzvah with zrizut, he's weighed out the time. I gave an example the other day when I was learning this. A person who goes, he can wake up and go to the early minyan at 6 o'clock, let's just say, the 6 o'clock minyan, but he knows he's going to daven quickly because he has to get home to help with the kids and whatever. Or he could say, you know what, at 8 o'clock, after I've gotten the kids out the door and I've done everything I need to do in the morning, I can go to the 8 o'clock minyan and I can daven benachat, right? So then you would think, wait a minute, he's being lazy, I'm going to go to the 8 o'clock. No, he's using his zrizut focus. He's doing his Zrizut. His Zrizut is, I can do everything that needs to get done correctly, so that when I'm doing my shalom bayit, I'm doing the things with my kids with Zrizut, I'm doing it correctly, and I'm not doing my davening with Zrizut, which is the opposite of what you're supposed to be doing, and therefore his atzlut, which it looks like he's being lazy, he's procrastinating davening, instead of davening at 6, which is the first time that you could do it, let's just say, and instead of he's doing it at 8, which you would say is, okay, he's delaying, he's procrastinating. No, his Zrizut is indeed something that he's doing it in the right time. So, but it's the key is how are you doing that mitzvah? When you get the chance to do the mitzvah, when you've said, okay, I've deliberated, I'm going to do the davening at 8 o'clock. Okay, now that I've committed to doing it at 8 o'clock, because I've thought about all the options, how do you do that 8 o'clock davening? Do you do the 8 o'clock davening with mamish, with a passion, and say, then what happens? Hashem says, oh, your real Zrizut, that's your Zrizut. At 8 o'clock, you get there with Zrizut. You really do it. Or you say, well, I missed out at 6 o'clock, so we're going to rush through the 8 o'clock. So he says, that's the point here is that it's the spirit, right? What energizes him? At 8 o'clock, he says, now I can daven properly. I was able to help at home properly. So now I could really, thank you Hashem for giving me that 8 o'clock minyan. So that 8 o'clock minyan davening is really the will, his really desire to do it. That Zrizut that he comes into that 8 o'clock minyan with, that shows that he's like, okay, so that shows that his whole thought process was really with Zrizut, it was really with focus, and it's not atzlut. And then he says that a person, that's the spirit, and Hashem wants that. And if we go back to the story of Aaron HaKohen, that's why Moshe tells him, Holech meherag, do it quickly, because Hashem wants to see that you're so excited to do the Torah to help stop the plague. So he says, do it with that. And a person who does, and in fact, he says here that it's a sign that a person who doesn't do it with Holech Mehira, the pasuk is telling us Holech Mehira to show us that do it with a desire, because then you're showing that your whole intention from the first moment, was really with a Zrizut. And if a person who doesn't do it with Zrizut, then you're showing that you really don't really possess that ability, that you don't really possess Zrizut in the right way. Now we can go back to a different pasuk in Mishlei that says, Ta'avat atzel timitenu ki me'anu yadav lasot. He says, if the desire of a lazy one will kill him, for his hands refuse to work. Now we can understand that using the context of the entire Torah that we just learned. Now we can understand the pasuk in Mishlei. It says, "Damrina meper kamen de sota." We learn in the first chapter of Sota. It says, "Kol hamatchil b'mitzvah v'nehagom ram oridino tamig dilato v'kover shto v'nav." A person who begins a mitzvah but doesn't complete it, right? He'll be demoted from his prominent position, and Allah Aleinu with other things will not necessarily be very positive. That's why the pasuk. What is the pasuk? And then it says that teaches that a tava sheyesh lo mitchila latchil b'mitzvah v'achar kach b'shvil atzlut minichena timitenu. He says what happens? A person has a drive in the beginning to do a mitzvah. He's so excited to do the mitzvah, right? And then he starts the mitzvah. What happens in the middle? Towards the middle, it slows down. It slows down. That's what's going to kill him, not literally but figuratively, right? Because Hashem wants to see that you have the passion and you have the desire to start. The moment you start, you're inspired to do a mitzvah. You follow through. You do it from A to Z. And I gave an example the other day when I was teaching. It says, let's say we have a guy comes for a tzedakah at the door, right? So the guy comes to the door and you say, okay, you know what, I'll give you money in a couple of days. I don't have money right now. I'll give you money in a couple of days. And then you forget about it. And then, a couple of days later, you totally forgot about it. You say, oh yeah, I'll transfer money on, Bit, Paybox, Venmo, whatever. And you don't necessarily, and you kind of push it off. Right? The moment the mitzvah was there, you had the moment to do it. You should have done it right away. And instead of doing it with Zrizut, you kind of took your time. And by taking your time, you're showing what you really wanted to do, what your whole intention. And that's why you killed the whole passion. And therefore he says, it's almost like, you kind of killed the whole thing. Right? Now, why didn't Hashem help him? Don't we know the famous, the Zera Shimshon asked a great question. Don't we know, what does it say? Habal taher hisayim, right? That's the opposite of what we just said. He says, what happened to that? Right? What happened to that statement where we learned the Gemara that says that if you do something and you start something, Hashem is going to help you finish it? Great question. He says, didn't we learn that principle that a person who starts to do something in the right direction, Hashem gives him an answer? The terus is the pasuk, the remaining part of the pasuk of Mishlei. Ki me'anu yadav lasot. The answer itself is in the question. Is this question? It states, for his hands refused to work. It means that it was out of laziness that he refrained from completing the mitzvah. Right? In the case of the guy who comes to the doors for tzedakah, instead of just saying, yes, I want to give you, so here, let me give you the money right now, you kind of say, yeah. And that proves your entire story, your entire mindset was that since you came to the door and I didn't give you right away, your muscles and your hands and your body show what your intentions were from the beginning. Because if you really were interested and you were really passionate and you really zariz, you would have said yes, let me do it right now. Right? And instead of doing that, that's when Hashem says, yes, I'll help you. When you show your true desire and you work things and you can't get to that last, can't get to the end zone, right? So Hashem pushes you over the line. Right? It's not someone who starts at at zero and doesn't even show from 0 to 1 that he's trying to push himself, but he gets barely to the halfway mark, and then he's expecting Hashem to help him. No, a person who gets to the 90% mark and he needs that extra 10%. That's when Hashem helps. But in the middle, if you just kind of collapse and you just kind of get overwhelmed or you get burdened by the mitzvah, then Hashem says, well, I'm not going to help you with that because you've just shown me your real intentions. So what have we learned from this case? So the whole story, this whole Torah is really starting from the words v'holech mehira. Holech mehira means work quickly. So Moshe was telling him that the pasuk was telling us that that Moshe was telling Aaron that you need to work quickly with the passion, with the zrizut, with a real burning, with a fire in you to do it, so that Hashem sees that you really are passionate about the entire thing. We're not, God forbid, are we challenging Aaron's willingness to do things, because that would be the opposite of what Aaron HaKohen is. And then what do we then we learn? Then the Zera Shimshon goes through the story of David and the story of Shaul, two kings who were challenged. One was challenged by to learn to be patient, and one was challenged to be patient. And at the same time, in another case of the same situation, he was trained to do right away, to be very quick. And the point is that in both cases, the test was to do the opposite of what they're used to, the opposite of their regular trait of Zrizut. And to show you that Zrizut doesn't necessarily mean swift, it means to be deliberate, so that when you do act, you act swiftly and you're done. You're in, you do what you got to do, and you leave, right? As opposed to, but up until that point where you're quick, that you're taking your time, you're focused, and that's the lesson, is that your Zrizut needs to be done in a deliberate, focused manner. And it doesn't mean that if you take your time, it doesn't mean that you're procrastinating, but rather you're doing the thing, you're doing your whole action is done with a certain sense of passion and desire and Zrizut.
Can we make a dedication? Because I just heard news, unfortunately, while we were on live, my son's unit, there was a tragedy, and one of the boys, unfortunately, I think is with us. We don't know who yet, we don't know details. We know there's a lot of injured, but I do believe my son is okay, thank you Hashem, but still, we should keep davening.
Bezrat Hashem, the zchut of the Zrizut the army in general and your son's unit in particular should learn to be zariz in the right way, at the right moment, the right time to act swiftly, and they also learn to not only things with in Gaza, but also in general, they should be successful with everything they do. And Hashem should get, in that case, Hashem is trying to teach us that we abad taher. We're trying to be mitaher Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael. There, Hashem should help them in everything that they do.
Beautiful, thank you.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Thank you, L'chaim, everybody. Thank you for joining us.